You're listening to Life Repair Recovery Talk Radio with Rick Thompson, only on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, welcome to Life Repair Recovery Talk Radio. I am your host, Rick Thompson. This show is about sobriety and recovery. Each week, we discuss a different topic relating to addiction with the aim that you can gain some insight, guidance, and hope from our discussions. We focus the show in 3 different segments. 1, the viewpoint of the families dealing with the family members suffering from alcoholism and addiction so they may assist them in obtaining treatment. 2, the psychological trauma and emotional damage alcoholics and addicts and their families experience. 3, the role of the insurance companies and associate providers and their part in the recovery process.
Good evening and welcome to the show. My name is Rick Thompson. On this evening's show, we're going to address the topic of internet porn in correlation to the effect that it has on the adolescent male. This is a very disturbing scenario, as I'm sure that you can understand. And the gravity of it is pretty intense, of how many young people are engaged in this kind of a thing and how long that they've been engaged in it. Some of these young guys have been involved in this since they were 10 years old. Our guest of this evening to call in was Dr. Mary Koster. And as soon as she does, she's going to give us some background, clinical background, on this disease, which is what it is. Hello, Dr. Koster. How are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing, Rick?
I'm good.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. I'd like to tell our audience that you're a renowned psychotherapist and specializing in the treatment of addiction solution-focused therapy and clinical hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy, excuse me. What I would like to start out with on this topic of internet porn, which would be a few questions that are of interest to our listeners. The first question that I have for you is, at what age does the viewing of pornography begin? That's the first part of it. What do you see as the initial issue that will take the male adolescent towards viewing pornography? And might this be a peer-pressured scenario?
Okay. Let's start out with, it's going younger and younger, down to the age of 10. Though the highest viewed pornography is between 12 and 17. That's where the highest volume of pornography is viewed. But it is young as 10, and it's going younger and younger. Peer pressure, no. This is a secret thing. This is something, and it starts because of just puberty. They're just interested in and the opposite sex. And the way the internet is set up, it just lures them into this.
So they're starting at like what age? Like 7, 8, 9, 10?
10. I've not known many under 10. But by 10, some of those that eventually become addicted have already started.
That's unbelievable. Well,
yeah, because it's a huge, huge problem. Pornography today is moving from an individual and couple's problem to a public health problem, capable of harming the emotional, sexual relationship well-being of millions and millions of men, women, and children. What it does is it causes, in particular, if you're talking in terms of men now, young adolescent boys, it changes their ability to have a meaningful relationship with a female. They get fixated on the honeymoon stage of a relationship and go from one relationship to the next. And what it means by affecting all of these families is that they lose interest in their partner unless they're in the honeymoon stage of a relationship. So they don't stay, or they have affairs, or they get involved with multiple different people. Right. Which brings in a lot of STDs. But mostly what happens is it breaks families up, and it makes unhappy family relationships.
I'm very surprised at the age that this starts out. I'm thinking, when I was 10 years old, the last thing I really was thinking about was girls. And so you've got 10-year-old children now. I know that was, another lifetime and a long time ago. The circumstances were different.
Yeah, you've got a lot of these games with high intensity and violence, and they're into everything at a very much younger age than they were when you were young.
Yeah, that's true.
Kids understand the internet. They understand it better than I understand it, and they can probably manipulate the internet a lot faster than I can.
Well, yeah. Well, they're on it all the time. I want to switch gears here for just a second because I was on the internet the other day and I was getting material for the show, and I came across the Ted Bundy interview. And what's your opinion? Because I sent you a copy of it. What is your opinion on the Ted Bundy interview pertaining to this particular issue?
Well, I can't believe you're jumping right into this quick, but Dr. James Thompson is the interviewer for Ted Bundy. And what was so fascinating about this, and I followed his story for a long time, but see, I didn't know that much about the internet porn when I was following his story as I do today. But before he was executed, I think it was 1989,
right. Before he was executed,
all these people came and wanted to interview him. Everybody wanted to talk to Ted Bundy.
Absolutely.
It had been 10 years that he was a very brilliant man, and was turning himself before all of his appeals finally wore out and he was up for execution. All these people wanted to talk to him, but this fellow, Dr. Thompson, is the only person he allowed to interview him, which I thought was remarkable. And there were a couple of things about this that were really important to me. One of them was Ted Bundy wanted to tell the world about pornography. Now, 1989, today's world in pornography has exploded 500 times what it was in 1989.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's no internet.
And like he said, what is it that Ted Bundy was so anxious to say? Why did he want that interview, which was the night before his execution, with a psychologist? And Ted Bundy felt he owed it to society to warn of the dangers of hardcore pornography and to explain how it had led him to murder so many innocent women and girls. And it continued. With tears in his eyes, he described the monster that took possession of him when he also added alcohol. So it was alcohol and pornography, both of which he was addicted to. And those two together caused the problem. He said his craze to kill was always inflamed by violent pornography. This was a really fascinating interview to me.
Yes.
Because he was raised in a relatively normal family.
Environment, right. Very straight people, stable.
Straight people.
Yep.
And he had 5 brothers and sisters and professional parents in a Christian home. Why would this happen to somebody like him? He said something else. Let's see if I can find it in here that I thought was absolutely fascinating. He said that he has been in prison. Here it is, right here. He said, I'm not a social scientist, and I don't pretend to believe what Joe Blow Citizen thinks about this, but he said, I've lived in prison for a very long time now, which was 10 years, and I've met a lot of men in prison who were motivated to commit violence. With no exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, deeply consumed by the addiction of pornography. Now, this isn't a matter of just viewing, what would you call it, just looking at pornography periodically or once in a while. An addiction to pornography is hours looking at pornography. Mm-hmm. And it's an addiction to fantasy.
True.
Where you make up. The way they have women portrayed, the way they even have men portrayed, the size of the penis in pornography. It's so unrealistic. And these are the images that very young boys are coming into.
Right. The
way our brains are set up. I was reading something recently where like 100 years ago, maybe a man was exposed to maybe 5 or 6 different sexual images before he picked a person that he was with. In today's world, it's 20,000.
At least.
And they are so flooded with these images that it changes how the brain processes sexuality.
Yeah, because you've got so much information coming at you, you're flooded. Your brain's flooded. It's just way too much information. My God. I mean, I think about a child that's, who's got nothing but hyperactivity going on, and he's on the internet or she's on the internet and surfing through these sites, which are endless. And I mean, I can't even wrap my head around the amount of sick data that's being poured into these kids' brains.
Yeah.
How do you think the sexual fantasies begin, and how do they progress?
Well, I think fantasy is a natural thing for human beings, especially with sexuality.
Right.
But what this does is accentuate, there's nothing real about pornography. If you know much about, how they get Photoshop and other things, you have no idea what these people really look like.
Of course.
But the way they portray them, so you get in your mind. A woman has to have a boob job. She has to have, this is what she has to look like, or she's not a woman. And I'm certainly not capable of having a sexual relationship with a person because I don't look like this man looks. I do not have as big of an organ as this man may have.
Right, well, it destroys his self-image and his self-esteem.
That whole thing is what's involved with this.
Yeah, well, they weren't thinking about that when they were making the films. They were thinking about making money. And
Well, I think the Ted Bundy thing is actually an interview that you can watch, but I have never seen it myself.
Yeah, it's on the internet. I watched it the other day, and I was just blown away because actually I saw that. I was living in Tampa when he was executed, and we watched it. My ex-wife and I watched it. They did it live, and I was blown away by this whole thing. I mean, when they were doing it live, and how this whole thing turned into pornography. And I believe the man was sincere. I mean, he knew he was going to meet his maker the next day, and he had there was no downside or upside to being honest or trying to be manipulative. And
he also said something else in this interview. He said that even the Christian values and the deep value system and ethics that he was raised with were not strong enough to push against the addiction to pornography. And he probably started out with normal pornography. In fact, it does mention in there that he found some pictures of something in the dump that somebody had thrown away. They were just pictures. And then from there comes to other forms of pornography. And then what happens is he keeps setting the bar higher and higher in order to get the dopamine surges in the pleasure zone of the brain, which is what addiction is all about. Mm-hmm. If it just stayed there so that you looked at pornography and it was just the way it is always, it wouldn't be a problem. But with a person, let's see, I don't know if you've seen this yet, but Pleasure Unwoven explains the brain and how the brain is set up for addiction. And they have a resilient brain, and they have another brain that is less resilient, and that's where addiction sets in. Those are the more creative people. And the way it is explained in that movie is he talks about the brain that's more susceptible to alcoholism and to addiction is like limestone. It can be carved by water. The other is a hard rock. Mm-hmm. Most people have the hard rock, but some of us have this brain that is not as resilient, and that's where creativity takes place. So there are a lot of positive things about having a brain like that, though it is subject to addiction. Now, on statistics and things, it's hard to know. I know that 1 out of 10 people who drink anything have a genetic problem with alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know, because of things that I've read on marijuana, 24% of adolescents who smoke marijuana will become addicted to it. And what that means is they can't stop when they would like to. What it means is that it overtakes and becomes the most important thing in their life. In other words, they may skateboard, and once they get into the marijuana, they stop skateboarding. School becomes a secondary thing. Not everybody has those experiences, but that's almost 1 out of 4 of kids. Now, when they hit age 24, marijuana hits the brain different, and it's 9%. Now, what they said was 9% of adolescents had that potential for this addiction. I really think it's higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially if it's mixed with marijuana and other things, because once the pleasure zone of the brain sets that up for addiction, it can be addicted to any substance, potassium, ice cream, anything that gives this brain a feeling this is better than I thought it was going to be. They want more and more and more. But this is scary. This thing with pornography. And
well, how far reaching do into the fantasy realm can they go? I mean, are we talking like incest, rape, and adolescent predatorial behavior and the like? Do you think there's any boundaries really for the information?
Well, look at Ted Bundy. Where did his boundaries go?
Well,
you know, in order to get the same charge that he was getting out of, first it starts with regular pornography, then it gets into more violent pornography. But today's kids are set up with all these video games and things that also are interested in the violence and the guns and all of this, what I call it is high intensity.
Yes.
And, you know, there's an author, Patrick Carnes, who is really for many years has been studying this. His first book was Out of the Shadows, which means out of the secret life of masturbation and pornography. It used to be masturbation, but now the pornography has made this. It's a huge, huge problem. I was talking to somebody today who told me that he believes 30% of people who use pornography are addicted to it. That is really high.
That is very, very high. It's very high.
And so, what happens then, you know, they have sex addicts is broken into many, Sex Addicts Anonymous is broken into many different groups. And in Los Angeles, I have that in one of my notes here, the different groups, but some of those programs, people go when they're already involved with the law. Mm-hmm. They can be masturbating in, well, like Disneyland or something that is, and what I'm talking about is they keep pushing it higher and higher and higher to get the same excitement, because the dopamine part of the brain is what is affected by addiction. Mm-hmm. And they get in trouble with the law, so they're sent then to sex addicts in recovery. There are all kinds of things that are being done. I mean,
that's interesting.
This is something that, okay, from Ted Bundy, if he was alive today, can you imagine what he would be talking about with what is available now?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but
this is 17 years later.
Right, but now it's just become really, it's an epidemic, if you think about it.
Well, it is, but people don't know it yet. It is an epidemic.
We've got a caller calling in for just a second, it seems. Hi, welcome to Life Repair.
Hi there.
Hi, who am I speaking to?
This is Sally.
Hi, Sally. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You have a question for the doctor? Or opinion?
Yes. As far as I know, there's three types of mind thinking. There's the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the no conscious mind. I was married, not any longer, to a very addicted man to pornography. He justified pornography by saying these women gave him what he wanted without having to give them anything back in return. So there's that element. Yeah, that was his justification.
It doesn't. He doesn't have to give anything.
Right. He can get what he wants.
He doesn't have to give anything. He's a taker. He can take anything he wants, and he doesn't have to give. But, you know, I was reading something today because I was doing some more research on this. 55% of divorces today are caused by pornography.
Absolutely.
And there's no question about it. And then Dr. Oz, which it was about 4 years ago, and I was in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was thinking a rerun on Dr. Oz, and she had 6 good-looking couples that were not having sex. He said at that time it's an epidemic with young married people.
That's amazing.
They are not having sex. So then he was referring the audience to this, the Brain on Porn, the Brain on Pornography, which is a huge involved website. But here it destroyed your marriage. And he's right. He doesn't have to give anything. It's all there for the taking.
And the appetite is never satisfying. It just gets worse and worse and worse. And I truly believe, this is my own presumption, I believe a lot of the men that are gay, most of them are good-looking men. They've had all the women they want. They've had 2 or 3 at one time. So that sexual appetite is never, ever satisfied. So then they go into the next, which would be other men. And that's truly what I believe why most men are gay.
Wow. Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I never even thought about that.
That's a little bit of a leap, but what does happen is they get into more violent sex. And here's what happened to young people today. Their sex is more, what would you call it, more of a perpetrator sex. You know, what we consider rape, they don't consider rape. And their piercings and their language and the videos that they send to one another, very, very young ages.
And the phone with texting now, everyone's sending pictures and whatnot, text-wise, to these young kids. High school kids are sending pictures back and forth, and that's just making it worse because that's for them. That's funny enough. Then they want to go and seek more into that. That's where kind of it all falls. I believe in the texting.
Yeah. Well, and the bit is, what do we do about it? Well, here's the thing that I think we're doing it already, Rick is, by talking about it. Opening that up. Your marriage ended because of pornography. And this man said, listen, I don't have to give anything. And he's right, he doesn't. Then I was reading a couple of years ago about Japan. 50% of the single people in Japan in their 30s, men, were virgins.
That's unreal.
Because they're into pornography. They didn't say that. I added that. Because it's an internet country. Of course. Because normal people get into relationships before this pornography thing because they wanted sex. And they had to, somebody was telling me, you know, that quote that he had given me. He said, I love this. It takes away, you don't learn to stumble. I thought this was so cute. You don't learn to stumble.
That's right. You don't learn it. No mistakes are made because it's the same scenario every night. And it's clean. You're in, you're out. And there's no interaction with an actual human being.
No strings, no ties, no buying the flowers because you did something wrong.
Right, nothing.
It's free. And that's the sad thing. And 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't free. Now everything's free on the internet.
Right.
Well, there's another book by Patrick Kearns.
Not everything in life is free. There's always a cost.
That's a major understatement.
Patrick Kearns is the one that I admire the most on this. He has a book that's called Out of the Shadows. Then he has a book that's called Don't Call It Love, which one is one of the best books on addiction I've ever read. And then he has The Betrayal Bonds. And in The Betrayal Bonds, he talks about the difference between an intense relationship and an intimate relationship. Pornography gets them into intensity.
It's an adrenaline rush. It's what it is, an adrenaline rush, and that's where the addiction comes.
Adrenaline. Yes.
The endorphins are getting fed.
Yeah,
and then it goes higher and higher. Now we have to have 3 in a bed together. Then we have to swap partners. Then we have to have rope. Then we have to do this. Then we have to do that. It keeps going, and that's what Ted Bundy was talking about. And then it got into more violence. And then his fantasies began to take over. It's too bad that they executed him because this man had so much information because he was so brilliant. He was a brilliant
they could have used him as a lab rat. They could have studied him.
But he was brilliant. He could talk about himself in a way that we could understand him. And he had, let's see, what he said, this kind of fantasy is life that is fueled largely by pornography, his fantasy and how it began. The barriers I had learned as a child were not enough to hold me back from seeking out and harming somebody else, because that was the next step. Let's tie you up.
Yeah, there's that.
Well, I believe alcoholism has been exposed, and everyone's free to talk about it. Being an alcoholic. I believe pornography is still in the closet. A lot of men have a lot of shame that they carry with it, and that's why it's a bigger problem than anything, because it's not being exposed. And once it's exposed, truth will set you free.
Yes,
so a lot of men, they're closet addicts with the pornography, and women too. I mean, it's not only men, but it's women as well.
Yeah, it goes all the way to the board.
Shame. There's a lot of shame based with it. That's where it's going.
Yeah.
The one thing
well, you're absolutely right. But see, Rick is opening some of this up, and it's because I was thinking about talking about this on the radio. It's hard. I don't know if I would talk about this on the radio, even though I'm a professional. But somebody has to begin to talk about that.
Right.
And Pamela Anderson started talking about this, and they absolutely crucified her.
They went crazy on her. Yeah.
How dare you talk about this? Well, I don't know what her story is. She has 2 sons, but she has a story. I know Ted Bundy's story because he has written about it. But I don't know what her story is and why she's so adamant about it. I know your story and what it caused you. But what it does to the partner thinks, They're not attractive anymore.
Yes, and they can't keep up. There's no way they can keep up with the actors.
Yeah, there's no way you can do that. That's crazy. Yeah.
Plus the fact that the addict has to set up all the arguments so that the partner goes to sleep and the addict's up all night on the internet. Just like if they were drinking. The addict sets up the argument, walks out the door, and goes and gets drunk. But this is even more secretive because you can be in your office, you can be in your home, you can be anywhere. You can be in your car with your telephone. It doesn't matter.
Right, because it's mobile, completely mobile.
But I don't believe that it is a socially you wanting to be part of the group. I think it is all secretive. I doubt very much if people are even talking about it amongst themselves.
Right.
Other than it has opened up the ability for them to talk about things at a much younger age. But I don't think they're talking about the internet porn they're looking at. I think that's still shameful and secretive for them.
Yeah, it is. The one thing that I was thinking about today is how far along is the disease until the actual brain damage begins to occur? And what is the initial and actual long-term physical damage to the male or female brain from watching pornography?
I would say that the long-term thing is they cannot have sex with another human being. That they have sex with themselves.
Wow.
But in the beginning, I think it's a gradual thing. And I think what gets people to the internet to begin with, young kids, and it's like I said, between 12 and 17 is the highest volume of internet porn. That age group. Those are the times you're supposed to be out there flirting and stumbling and standing up and going, ask somebody to dance again, all of that kind of stuff. And you're on the internet. So, it's hard to know with addiction. Some addiction can take place. Some addictions can start from the very beginning. Cocaine, some of those addictions can start the first time you ever use them.
Right.
It depends how your brain is set. If you come from an addictive type of, genes, it's easier. Now you get into recovery when it comes from substance abuse. It's huge. Even people who weren't into porn before they got into recovery, that's part of what happens in recovery and stops them from getting the life. Pornography is a sex educator.
I just want to go back for just a second because I didn't clearly get the bigger picture because we had a conversation the other day in reference to the actual brain damage that happens. And my thoughts were, I'm just trying to figure out at what point, if you've got a 10-year-old kid that's watching porn, how long does it take from like when he starts until where there's the actual brain damage for him being able to relate to a female on any real level whatsoever?
I'm not sure that they have determined this yet. But I know you asked me this before. I am not sure. In my professional opinion, it's a gradual thing. It would depend how much time is spent. What I am telling you is I have known people that have spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on the internet until they are so physically exhausted they can do nothing else.
Well, it's like you can't even walk. If you walk across the room and you turn the doorknob, you pass out. I know that's being a little light about it, but if you think of it, somebody that's masturbating for hours at a time, you know what I mean? That's going to wear anybody out, for God's sake. I mean, it's really sick when you think about it, and it's very sad because this person is literally throwing their lives away by engaging in this kind of behavior repetitively.
Yeah, but it's for all of society. It isn't just that person.
Mm-hmm.
What we're doing, it's our families that are involved. It's the children that are involved.
Right.
It's our marriages that are involved.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just a bare beginning. We're already in trouble.
Right.
Most people have no idea we are. They really don't know. It's like you asked me before, how do family members, what should they do? Family members aren't going to know this.
Right. Well, how are they going to know? They're not going to know because it's a secret. I mean, these people are hiding doing this thing, and how are they going to know unless they get caught? That's nuts. Sally, are you still on the line with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
I'm back.
Good. She's a great listener.
I'm working on that skill.
Yeah, I understand. Aren't we all on one level or another? So what are you thinking about? What's going through your mind as you listen to this?
Well, what I try to do is try to figure out the mind and the brain and where it's going, and where this all originated from, why the addiction started. And I've seen pornography here and there. I was married to a man who was addicted, so obviously I've seen it. My conclusion is that most men on the pornography, the actors on there, are not very good-looking men. You don't really see these real good-looking guys.
True.
And I've kind of concluded the reason they don't have good-looking men is have these kind of ugly-looking guys, so that when other men are watching it, they're looking at this guy, because men are very competitive. They're looking at a man. If they want to look at his organ, they're going to get intimidated, so that's different. Looks-wise, a man looks at an ugly man and thinks, I can get a girl like that too. And that's where the addiction comes in as well.
That's the hook.
That's the hook.
Right.
Wow, that's something I haven't really thought about. Yeah.
Because if a man's looking at another good-looking man on these sites, they're going to think, oh, I can't get a girl like that. He's good-looking.
He's good-looking.
But if a guy's ugly, he's going to think, I can do the same as him.
Right. Even though I'm not as, physically endowed as this individual.
Right.
Most people aren't, unless they're a horse, I would think, so.
So what they do is they put that hook in there, and that's where it starts from that spot forward. And then it just gets to be an addiction that they can't get rid of.
Right, and then the reels start running in your head and off you're out to
Right.
Let me ask you a question, Doctor. How damaging do you think porno is to the adolescent male being able to actually communicate with a female within an intimate relationship setting?
This is where they learn everything as adolescents. And the reason they learn how to communicate, for a couple of things. They learn by watching their parents, but they also learn because they want to have sex with somebody out there. Mm-hmm. And they push through I like this thing, they learn how to stumble.
Right.
They fall down and get up again. Why do they keep doing that? Because they have an outcome. They've gone through puberty, and the women are interesting to them. But with the internet, women aren't interesting to them. They don't have any sexual energy. I don't know if you have people in your life that are involved in this thing, but they don't have a lot of sexual energy about them. Mm-hmm. It's all being absorbed in something else.
Right. Well, they wouldn't have any if they're, engaging in that kind of activity privately. They're not going to have any energy to have any kind of real interaction with another person.
Yes, because it's scary. You have to learn those skills.
Of course.
I remember being in junior high and somebody asks you to dance, and it's scary. All of that stuff is really, really scary. Mm-hmm. But when you're involved over here, you don't have any male-female energy to push you through this. Mm-hmm. You don't have any.
I think it goes back to that brain again. I like to focus on that. Like I said, you've got your conscious mind, which is you're in the now and the reality, and you've got your subconscious mind, which is your values and your core and your character, and you've got your non-conscious mind. And when somebody does pornography, they have got to turn all conscience off and be in that non-conscious. So I think when somebody learns how to quickly turn that mind-brain frame to non-conscious easily, then it spreads into other areas of life. Having no conscience and doing things that are just a bad character and bad ethics. So I think pornography is just numbing. Basically, it's numbing the brain is what it's doing.
Yeah, that's true. You've got there is a serotonin release when you have an orgasm, right? So
now, in order to get the brain to recover from something like this, and this is where it's really a tough one, you have to abstain for a length of time to get this brain rewired. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if when you go into AA, you have to stop alcohol and rewire the brain. You have to stop what you're doing, and the brain will eventually heal itself.
Right.
That is a powerful, powerful thing. And not only, you have pornography, which is bad enough, but then you click it into orgasm. So now that's the reward. Right. So you watch pornography, you have the orgasm, watch pornography. So you've got this reward thing, and it's tough. It is really tough. But I'm so glad, Sally, you called in, because this is what, to me, is the tragedy. It's the marriages. It's the families.
It destroys lives.
Yeah, I was married for 24 years, and, of course, I was the blame for everything. But I know ultimately that's what it was. I had to deal with it for my whole marriage. And about every 2 months, he would come to me and confess, do his confession, and I believed him. I'm like, okay, you're a guy, and I believed it was okay until now. I look back, and it's basically an adulterous affair. It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's the same thing. But I put up with it, and I figured he was just doing it every 3 months, and just came to me the day after he had done his pornography. But I really, like, again, I've been studying the brain, and I realized his conscience couldn't deal with it anymore. He had to come to me after he had been doing it day after day after day after day. In that third month, he just broke down and told me.
Yeah, it's shame. There's a lot of shame, I would think, that's connected with that. Not just
yes,
self-esteem.
Exactly.
Your self-esteem has gone down the toilet. I mean, how can you have self-esteem when you're sitting and looking at two people you don't know on a television screen? You're masturbating all day. I mean,
absolutely, it's horrible. I mean, I think there's one thing to watch it for a man. I mean, it's still wrong, but there's another thing to act upon it while they're watching it, if you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
But that's usually the point for that. Yeah.
Right. So that's where I think it really goes bad, when that occurs. I don't I've got so much to say about this subject. It's just
Well, I want to throw a question. I want to throw one question out. What is the long-term damage to the adolescent brain, in addition to the emotional stability and spiritual condition of anybody that's doing this?
The adolescent brain, is just beginning to pull itself together. They're thinking, I think it would be extremely damaging, but that is where most of the pornography is now. Let's see, where did I have it in my notes here? I mean, it was really, I could not believe at the percentage that they had. Okay, 70% of all pornography is 15 to 17 years old users.
Whoa.
50%.
You would think the parents would have a little tighter rein on their kids and have a better monitoring system.
The parents are just beginning. I've talked to people. I'm in the field of addiction, but I've talked to the layman out there. TED Talks on YouTube is what's brought a lot of this out. That TED Talks, and I was talking to a man who had a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. He is very, very concerned about this. What do I do? I don't know. But where he became aware of it was the TED Talks and the damage that it is doing to the men having a normal relationship.
Do you think
there's all kinds of internet blocks, like the Net Nanny, and there's some other things, but the internet sites are still able to get in, so they're not safeguarded.
Are there any long-term treatment centers for this kind of disease, as there would be for alcohol or drugs?
Yes, of course there are. You get Tiger Woods. He was one of the sex addicts look what he did. His whole profession, everything was all tied up into this. Mm-hmm. He's never been able to pull himself together. After that, this was a big deal. That case had started out with his father. Boys will see their fathers do things. And in some cases, the father will introduce them to the girlfriend, but when they're still married to the mother. And it really messes these teenage boys up. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about the internet porn, and there's a lot out there. It's still, you, Rick, are opening something up here. You're opening something up by putting it on.
It's dangerous. I can see where this literally can just destroy people. This is when I've seen one, maybe two pornos, and not all the way through. I was in a group of pilots one night, and we were all sitting around. There's a party, and I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, I don't get it. I just didn't get, are you insane? Why would you sit around and waste your time watching this shit? Because that's what it is. It's like, these guys are surrounded by gorgeous women, stewardesses, and I'm thinking, you're watching porn? I'm like, yeah, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. Anyway, now, are there actual treatment centers, that specialize in porno addiction? That's what they do.
I'm sure there are, but I'm presently not that aware of that, but they call it sex addiction. There are many. This is a big program here. In LA, it's a big program.
So there's a specific 12-step program for pornography.
Oh, there's many. There are more than one. Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts, the people that are constantly in love and attached to the honeymoon stage of a relationship.
Right.
And they call it anorexia. Actually, in that program, they call it anorexia because you are not involved with another person. You're involved with an image. You're involved in a fantasy. It's an addiction to
That's where the shame comes in. That's why it's not being exposed. It's so shameful. Whereas alcohol, you can go out with your buddies or with people and drink and still accepted in society. Whereas if somebody knows someone's a porn addict, it's kind of a ew, even though there's so many.
Immediately because that's a little icky. Sorry about the pun, but it is.
Yeah. So people just don't want to talk about it. And a lot of times people won't talk about sex, period. You know, it's one of the man-made things, and people are just so afraid to talk about it. And I think that's why a lot of men do pornography, because the women are just closed up and they're not doing what they're supposed to do in their own marriage. That's why these men go out there and get what they need to get. So
I think it starts in, when you have to sit down when you're going to get married to somebody and you say, okay, look, we need to put everything on the table. What have you got to have sexually? This is what I got to have sexually. And what are your boundaries? These are my boundaries. If I think if that amount of simplicity in relation to the relationship is not put on the table, I think it's doomed for failure.
In my case, it's real different. You're going to may laugh at this. I had to have sex 4 times a day with this gentleman, and he still did his pornography within that same day. So he had a definite sex addiction, and that's pretty bad. I found out later he was on Viagra. Majority of our marriage, I didn't even know it.
Well, I'm sorry.
I wasn't familiar with it.
I'm really sorry that you had to go through that.
Ted Bundy said there's a lot of people like him walking around out there in our world.
That's true.
Lots of
Dr.
people
Koster,
just like him. And it is going to get more and more and more pronounced. When you take that 9% become severely addicted to the violent pornography, and then you couple it with 1 out of 10 substance abusers, you've got a powder keg here.
That's true.
Well, what I'm afraid of, like I said earlier, is that that appetite for people isn't enough, and they just want to go further and further and further. And this is where the child molesters come in. They've done everything, and that's where they go next.
Right.
And that's why the kids are the victims of it, because these men haven't had the appetite, like I said, will not ever get satisfied. It's like a candy-coated disease. You bite into it, and you're hooked.
I'd like to thank both of my guests for coming on tonight. Sally, thank you for calling in. Dr. Koster, it's always a pleasure. We're running out of time.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick.
We'll speak soon. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Nice talking with you.
Thank you, Sally.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We are at this end of this week's show. Our mission is to provide a safe platform for those who are still suffering from various forms of alcohol, drug, and whatever other addictions you may be involved in. We're just people willing to listen and offer suggestions to help those in crises. And at this point, I would like to leave you with some words of wisdom from the great, late John Flynn.
Disappointment. Disappointment is the caboose on the choo-choo train of expectation. Anything you want from anybody, you give them what you want from them. It's the only way you're going to get it. Life is about giving, not getting. Day at a time.
Thank you, John. Good night and good luck.
You're listening to Life Repair Recovery Talk Radio with Rick Thompson, only on LA Talk Radio.